It's the dead of winter, 1859. Snow buries the ground so deep you can barely see the wagon ruts that lead in and out of a tiny Utah settlement called Cedar Valley. The wind howls through cabins made of rough-hewn logs. Smoke curls up from chimneys, and everyone stays close to the fire, because stepping outside means frostbite, or worse. And in the middle of this frozen isolation, 7 women vanish. Not over 7 years, not even 7 months, but in 3 weeks. 7 young wives, all gone without a trace. No wagons, no goodbyes, no family waiting for them in California, as the official records would later claim. The truth was darker, buried under floorboards, whispered in shadows, and stained with blood no one dared mention aloud. Because these weren't just ordinary women. They were secrets, living, breathing secrets, that could have toppled the Mormon leadership of southern Utah, and brought federal troops storming into their sacred desert valleys. The stage is set. To understand what happened to Sarah Pemberton and the 6 others, you've got to know where this story really begins. Cedar Valley wasn't just another dot on a map. In 1859, this settlement of 300 souls was more like a chess piece, strategically placed 30 miles southwest of Salt Lake City. Travelers passed through on their way to California. Federal agents kept a close eye on it, and the Mormon leadership depended on it as an outpost of loyalty. But Cedar Valley was also scarred ground. Just 2 years earlier, President James Buchanan had declared Utah in rebellion and sent 2,500 soldiers marching west. The so-called Utah War fizzled out without a true battle, but make no mistake, it left the territory simmering. Washington didn't trust the Mormons, and the Mormons didn't trust Washington. The federal troops still camped at Camp Floyd, 40 miles away, were a constant reminder that peace was only temporary. Into that fragile peace stepped Elder Nathaniel Carrington. The man who ruled the valley. Carrington wasn't the kind of man you'd want as an enemy. At 42, he had iron gray eyes and the voice of a preacher who could bless you in the morning and bury you by sundown if you crossed him. He'd come west in 1851 with the third wave of Mormon pioneers. By the time he settled Cedar Valley, he'd built irrigation canals, raised crops out of desert soil, and constructed the largest granary south of Salt Lake. People called him pious, people called him practical, but behind closed doors, Carrington kept secrets of his own. Like many Mormon leaders, he practiced plural marriage, not openly, but in shadow. Wives taken in ceremonies with no legal record, no territorial recognition, and no trace in the census books. Invisible families, hidden by faith and fear. One of those wives was Sarah Pemberton. Sarah's secret. Sarah wasn't like the other women. At just 23, with auburn hair and sharp green eyes, she stood out. Born in Ohio, raised by a newspaper editor father, she could read far more than scripture. She knew politics, history, even foreign news, a rare skill in Cedar Valley. In the spring of 1857, Carrington sealed her as his 4th wife in a ceremony witnessed only by his first wife, Margaret, and a traveling elder. No documents, no records, just a vow in the dark. That vow placed Sarah in a dangerous position. She knew things, she overheard things. And when federal agents at Camp Floyd started sniffing around for hidden Mormon weapon stockpiles, Sarah and 6 other women, plural wives like her, were the ones who passed along whispers. The 7 women. Sarah wasn't alone. Rebecca Dalton, 26, 3rd wife of the grain master Samuel Brennan. Catherine Fletcher, 19, sealed illegally to Bishop Jonas Whitman. Mary Lou Kensington, 24. Hidden wife of merchant William Harper. Elizabeth Fairchild, 31, tied to Daniel Crawford, keeper of territorial mail. Anna Sullivan, 22, linked to supply runner David Singleton. Miriam Wallace, 28, wife of Joshua Wallace, who oversaw the valley's arsenal. All invisible, all married in secret, all bound by loyalty to their households, yet hungry for another kind of freedom. These women lived between worlds. To the government, they didn't exist. To their community, they were sisters in faith. And to the men they were bound to, they were both family and property. But their invisibility would soon make them expendable. The winter that changed everything. The winter of 1858-1859 was merciless. Snow fell early in October, and by January, temperatures plunged below zero for weeks. Food grew scarce. Spirits sank. The valley grew restless. Then came the tracks. One bitter February morning, Samuel Brennan spotted strange hoofprints circling his grain warehouse. At least 2 horses, not shod with the pattern used by Cedar Valley's blacksmith. Outsiders had come in the night, inspected the building, and vanished. Alarm spread like fire through dry grass. That evening, Carrington called a secret council at Harper's General Store. The men in the room. 7 men gathered in the lamplight. Elder Carrington, Bishop Whitman, Samuel Brennan, William Harper, Daniel Crawford, David Singleton, Joshua Wallace. Together, they ruled Cedar Valley from the shadows. They'd survived plagues of grasshoppers, droughts, and the threat of federal invasion. But this was different. Crawford, the postmaster, spoke first. His hands trembled as he set down a letter. Federal agents were in Fairfield last week. Claimed they were cattle buyers. Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house overheard them talking. Weapon caches. Supply routes. Cedar Valley, by name. The room froze. Wind whistled through cracks in the log walls. Because here's what they all knew. Hidden just 2 miles away, in a cave system southeast of town, lay Cedar Valley's arsenal. Rifles, powder, ammunition, enough to arm a small army. If the government found it, the whole valley could be seized under martial law. And that was when the council realized. Someone had been talking. Someone inside Cedar Valley. And the whispers traced back not to the men in that room, but to the women who weren't supposed to exist at all. To be continued. 7 women. 7 secrets. 7 graves waiting to be filled. The story of Sarah Pemberton and the covenant that sealed her fate had only just begun. Check mark. That's part 1. 1,000 words set up with a cinematic hook, suspenseful pacing, and easy American-style narration perfect for a YouTube audience. Would you like me to also draft a short YouTube-style intro script, voiceover style, 30 to 40 seconds, for this part so it grabs viewers right from the start? The Vanishing Wives of Cedar Valley. Part 2. Betrayal in the Shadows. Hook. Imagine sitting in a dimly lit cabin, the fire throwing long shadows across the walls, and 7 powerful men leaning forward around a rough wooden table. Outside, the wind howls through the valley like a hungry spirit. One question is whispered, but it chills every man to the bone. Who's been talking? Because in Cedar Valley, 1859, secrets weren't just private matters. Secrets were life and death. And what the men of the Leadership Council were about to discover, that their own wives, their hidden plural wives, had built a secret spy network, would tear apart everything they thought they controlled. The suspicion takes root. Bishop Jonas Whitman, his beard frosted from his late-night ride, leaned forward first. How could they know? He demanded. We've been careful. Only heads of households know where the weapons are stored. The women couldn't possibly. Joshua Wallace cut him off. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed fear. Someone's been talking. Someone who knows enough to point the Federals in the right direction, but not enough to give them everything all at once. Silence fell over the room. The men glanced at each other, each replaying the conversations in their own homes. Had they spoken too freely? Had a careless word slipped from their mouths in front of their wives or children? By midnight, they had examined every possibility. Gossip among the women, reckless chatter from teenage boys, or even Gentile traders watching too closely. But then, a darker thought began to creep into the room. The whispered accusation. Daniel Crawford broke the silence. He admitted that his wife Elizabeth had asked strange questions about his letters to Salt Lake. William Harper remembered that Mary Lou had shown interest in wagon deliveries. Samuel Brennan confessed that Rebecca had taken unusual walks, always near the hidden cave entrance to their main arsenal. Elder Carrington's voice was low, almost like he was ashamed to say it aloud. It's the plural wives. The words dropped like stones into water. The men loved these women. They had risked federal prosecution to marry them. They had built their most sacred vows around the doctrine of celestial marriage. But now, those same women might be the ones betraying them. The evidence grows. Over the following week, each man turned into a spy in his own home. Samuel Brennan shadowed Rebecca's trips for eggs and saw her pause too long near the hidden weapon cache. William Harper searched Mary Lou's sewing basket and found a notebook filled with strange notes. At first, they looked harmless, lists about farming, weather, and household chores. Then he realized. The dates matched supply wagon arrivals. Daniel Crawford heard whispers of Elizabeth speaking with strangers at Fairfield's market. Catherine Fletcher somehow knew the guard schedules for Cedar Valley's defensive posts, information she had no business knowing. Anna Sullivan had asked pointed questions about militia drills. Miriam Wallace lingered too long over her husband's military letters. And then came the proof no one could ignore. Sarah's letter. On March 8, Elder Carrington, ever meticulous, was going through his papers when he found something that stopped his heart cold. A folded letter, written in Sarah Pemberton's careful hand. It wasn't addressed. It hadn't been sent, but its contents were damning. The letter mapped out the exact locations of Cedar Valley's weapon caches. It listed quantities of rifles, barrels of powder, and supply routes. Sarah had even noted the weak spots in the valley's defenses, blind corners, thinly guarded paths, choke points where an army could slip through unseen. Worst of all, the letter recorded the rotation of guards, down to the hour. No casual observation could have produced that level of detail. Someone had been feeding Sarah information, or she had been gathering it systematically, with the precision of a trained spy. Carrington read the letter 3 times, each word cutting deeper. This wasn't just betrayal. It was treason. Margaret's revelation. That night, Carrington confronted Margaret, his first wife and the only one who had witnessed his secret marriage to Sarah. Margaret didn't try to deny it. She had seen Sarah's questions, her curiosity, her insistence on understanding the work of her husband. At the time, Margaret had thought it devotion, a way for Sarah to serve better as a wife. But now it was clear. Sarah had been watching, listening, recording. And Margaret revealed something even worse. The wives weren't acting alone. They had formed their own network. At private prayer meetings, they compared notes. They pieced together scraps of overheard conversations. They mapped out their husbands' activities with the patience of scholars and the desperation of women who knew they had no legal existence. They feel invisible, Margaret said quietly. No records of their marriages. No records of their children. If something happened to you, Elder, they would be left with nothing. I think they began collecting information to protect themselves. But it's grown beyond that. The web of spies. Within days, the council uncovered more damning evidence. Rebecca Dalton had drawn sketches of the grain warehouse, right down to the hidden compartments. Catherine Fletcher had compiled a list of every man in the valley with military experience. Mary Lou's records of supply deliveries matched reports federal officers had already gathered. The pieces connected too neatly. These women weren't gossiping. They were building an intelligence network. And then Joshua Wallace found the final, terrible proof. The blood price revealed. On March 15, while cleaning his rifle, Wallace pulled apart the wooden stock. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a roll of banknotes, $67 in crisp bills. More than most families would see in an entire year. The notes bore California mint marks. Federal money. Payment. The wives weren't just collecting information. They were selling it. The realization hit the council like a blow to the chest. These women, bound to them by faith, by oaths, by eternal promises, had been trading secrets for money and protection. The betrayal was complete. Crisis Council. On March 18, before dawn, the men gathered again. This time, not in a store or cabin, but deep underground, in Samuel Brennan's root cellar. The walls sweated with moisture. The air smelled of dirt and potatoes. Carrington's face looked carved from stone. He laid Sarah's letter on the table. Joshua Wallace placed the banknotes beside it. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Bishop Whitman's voice broke the silence. echoing against the earthen walls. They know too much to simply disappear. The Federals will expect more contact. If the women vanish suddenly, it could spark the very investigation we fear. David Singleton added, and what if they've already told more than we've uncovered? What if this is just one branch of a larger operation across the territory? The men looked at each other, the lamplight flickering across their faces. They had discovered the truth. But now they faced an even darker question. What do you do with 7 wives who know too much? To be continued. The answer they chose would lead to blood, burial, and the darkest secret Cedar Valley would ever hold. Check mark. That's part 2, 1,000 words rewritten in a YouTube-friendly horror history storytelling style, with a strong hook, simple narration, and pacing that builds suspense. Would you like me to also create part 3, the council's decision and the first disappearance, in the same style now, so the series flows seamlessly? The Purification Covenant, Part 3. A horror story from Cedar Valley. Imagine living in a place where every whisper feels like a warning, where even the people who once swore to protect you begin to watch you with suspicion in their eyes. That was Cedar Valley in the spring of 1859. A Mormon settlement that looked peaceful from the outside, families working fields, women baking bread, children playing near the creek. But beneath that surface calm, a terrible secret was tightening its grip. This is part 3 of the chilling true-inspired tale of Cedar Valley. The Whisper of Betrayal. Daniel Crawford, the community's postmaster, had always been a quiet man. He carried the valley's letters, news, and gossip in his leather satchel. But his job gave him something far more dangerous, access to the flow of territorial communication. One cold March evening, Daniel delivered a grim warning to the leadership council. Someone's been leaking information, he whispered. The federal patrols, they're moving differently. They're not wandering anymore. They're targeting our supply routes, our defenses. The room fell silent. They all knew what that meant. Someone from inside Cedar Valley was guiding the U.S. Army, pointing them straight at the community's weak spots. The suspects. Suspicion quickly fell on the plural wives, 7 women who lived in the shadows of the law. To the outside world, their marriages were invisible. No documents, no legal protections, just vows whispered in secret. That made them both powerful and vulnerable. Sarah Pemberton stood out most. She was educated. Unlike many pioneer women, she could read military reports, understand maps, and even recognize patterns in troop movement. She had knowledge, and knowledge could be dangerous. Her husband, Elder Carrington, once saw her intelligence as a gift. But now, he looked at her differently, like a man studying livestock before a sale. Cold, calculating, the trap of federal promises. The council pieced together the truth. Federal agents had been visiting Cedar Valley disguised as traveling merchants. They bought little, but asked many questions. They weren't after supplies, they were after secrets. And the plural wives, they were the perfect recruits. The government promised them things no one else could. Protection if polygamy was outlawed. Legal recognition for their marriages. Safety for their children. It sounded like salvation, but it was a trap. By giving information, these women had become spies. If caught, they'd be traitors to Cedar Valley. If abandoned by their handlers, they'd be outcasts, cut off from their families, their homes, their faith. They had nowhere to run. The council's dark decision. In the suffocating darkness of a root cellar, surrounded by sacks of grain and barrels of dried apples, the leadership council made a choice that would haunt the valley for generations. Samuel Brennan spoke the words first. What if they simply weren't here when the agents came back? The others stared at him in silence, but they knew what he meant. It was the birth of the Purification Covenant, a secret pact that would preserve Cedar Valley's safety by removing the women permanently. Not by trial, not by exile, but by disappearance. A community turns cold. Sarah noticed the shift immediately. Her husband no longer trusted her. Margaret, her sister wife, made cutting remarks during chores. Even neighbors who once smiled now looked at her with suspicion. At church, she and the other women were seated apart, as if placed on display, not to worship but to be watched. At Harper's General Store, William Harper timed her every move, noting how long she lingered near the shelves. The valley itself had turned against them. The letter of doom. On March 25, while dusting Elder Carrington's desk, Sarah found something that froze her blood. A letter, half written in her husband's hand, addressed to Salt Lake City. It spoke of relocation procedures for disloyal members. Clinical, precise, and merciless. Relocation. The word sounded harmless, until Sarah understood what it meant. These women weren't being moved. They were being erased. The Purification Covenant revealed. Sarah began her own secret investigation. She listened. She watched. And slowly, a horrifying picture came together. The plan was simple, almost elegant. The 7 wives would be told they were being moved to safer towns, away from federal patrols. They would travel in small groups, guided by trusted men, through remote mountain passes. Accidents would happen, avalanches, falls, broken wagons. The women would vanish, and Cedar Valley would have its cover story. They chose to leave. They wanted safety. No one would question it. Desperation in the shadows. By March 28, Sarah realized she couldn't survive alone. At the communal well, she whispered coded words to another woman, Catherine Fletcher. Catherine's eyes widened. She had overheard Bishop Whitman making travel arrangements with Daniel Crawford. It was true. Every suspicion was true. Together, they warned the others, Rebecca Dalton, Mary Lou Kensington, Elizabeth Crawford, Anna Sullivan, and Miriam Wallace. Each had noticed the same things: increased surveillance, unannounced searches, endless questions. By April 1, all 7 women understood the truth. They weren't wives anymore. They were enemies. The countdown begins. On April 3, Sarah found another letter hidden in her husband's papers. This one wasn't half finished. It was ready to send. Dated April 2, 1859, it spelled out the Purification Covenant in plain, merciless language. 7 individuals whose loyalty has been compromised will be relocated according to established protocols. Brother Joshua Wallace will coordinate passage through Cedar Canyon, April 8. Brother David Singleton will arrange the second group. It was official. It was planned. And it was only 5 days away. The wives were living on borrowed time. The terror builds. Sarah read the letter again and again, her hands shaking. Every line was a death sentence. She now faced a choice no woman should ever have to make. Stay silent and wait for relocation. Or risk everything by planning an escape through mountains still locked in snow, hunted by the very men they once called husbands. The clock was ticking toward April 8. And the horror of Cedar Valley was only beginning. Right finger if this story chilled you, share it with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support the channel, and subscribe so you don't miss part 4, where the wives must decide whether to fight, flee, or fall into the Covenant's trap. Would you like me to keep the next parts 4 to 10 at the same length and structure, around 1,000 words each, with an opening hook, cliffhanger ending, and YouTube-style engagement cues? Part 4: The Whispering Covenant. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that your neighbors, your husband, even the very church you trusted, are quietly plotting your disappearance. Not openly, not violently, but with the kind of cold planning that leaves no trace. That was the nightmare reality for the 7 women of Cedar Valley in the spring of 1859. The men of the Leadership Council called it the Purification Covenant. To them, it was a sacred duty, protecting the community from spies, traitors, and outsiders who might expose their secrets to federal troops. But to the women caught in its net, it was a death sentence dressed up in religious language. Suspicion becomes ritual. By April, daily life in Cedar Valley had turned into something out of a slow-moving nightmare. The plural wives marked as compromised could feel eyes on them everywhere. A trip to fetch water from the communal well meant being followed. Buying flour at Harper's General Store meant having someone watch every move, every glance, every coin exchanged. Sarah Pemberton noticed how her neighbors began treating her differently. Not with anger, but with that eerie politeness people use when they've already decided you're not going to be around much longer. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Soft words that carried no warmth. Even worship services turned sinister. The 7 women were made to sit together, in a row, like exhibits on display. The sermons shifted tone, too. Elders preached about the dangers of betrayal, about how God's wrath fell hardest on those who turned against their own people. The words were never directed outright at the wives, but everyone in the room knew who the messages were meant for. It was less a church service than a public warning. Sarah's terrifying discovery. On the night of April 3rd, Sarah made a discovery that confirmed every creeping suspicion. While cleaning Elder Carrington's study, she stumbled across a draft letter hidden under a stack of correspondence. It was addressed to Bishop Samuel Richards in Salt Lake City. The letter didn't even try to hide its intent. In crisp, clinical handwriting, it explained that 7 compromised individuals would be relocated according to established protocols. Names weren't listed, but the details left no doubt. The first group would leave Cedar Valley on April 8, guided through the mountains by men trusted to carry out the covenant. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the instructions. She knew instantly what relocation meant. No one was coming back. These weren't transfers, they were executions disguised as disappearances. She returned the letter exactly as she found it, careful not to leave a trace. But in her heart, she knew, the countdown had begun. Silent warnings. The following morning, Sarah went about her routine with a mask of calm, but her eyes were always scanning for allies. At the well, she locked eyes with Catherine Fletcher and gave the smallest nod. A signal. Catherine returned it, she knew. Over the next days, the 7 women managed to communicate through fragments of coded language, brief touches, even the way they handled laundry on the lines. A shawl folded twice instead of once meant, "We need to talk." A loaf of bread cut into 4 pieces instead of 5 meant, "They're watching me closely today." By April 5, all 7 women knew the truth. They weren't just being watched. They were being prepared to vanish. Fear in the homes. The danger was everywhere, even inside their own houses. Husbands who once showed affection now acted like wardens. Joshua Wallace rifled through his wife Miriam's belongings late at night, searching for signs of letters or coded notes. David Singleton questioned Anna Sullivan for hours about people she had spoken to months earlier. The wives' daily lives turned into interrogations. Every errand had to be explained. Every conversation accounted for. Even their children, sensing the tension, began to fear speaking too freely. And yet, the women resisted the urge to panic. They whispered their plans carefully, like prisoners digging a tunnel one spoonful at a time. The trap of relocation. What made the plan so chilling was its elegance. The men didn't intend to kill their wives in front of the community. Instead, they'd tell the women they were being sent to safer settlements, places far away from federal patrols. They'd be escorted by trusted church members through the remote mountain passes. If anyone asked questions later, the community would have neat explanations. The wives had chosen to leave. They wanted peace. Maybe they'd even remarried somewhere else. No one outside Cedar Valley would ever know the truth. Sarah realized something horrifying. The purification covenant wasn't just about them. It was a test. If the community could erase 7 women this cleanly, what was to stop them from erasing anyone who stood in their way? The weight of isolation. By April 6, the atmosphere in Cedar Valley was unbearable. The wives were shunned openly. At meals, people refused to sit beside them. When they approached neighbors for help with chores, excuses flowed like water. "I'm busy today. Ask someone else." Even children were pulled away from playing near them. Mothers whispered warnings. "Don't get too close." The message was clear. These women were already ghosts. Sarah described it later in her secret journal as living in a coffin before the lid is nailed shut. A desperate choice. That evening, Sarah gathered the women in secret at Catherine Fletcher's barn. They huddled in the dark, their breaths visible in the cold spring air. For the first time, they spoke plainly about what was happening. We have less than 3 days, Sarah told them, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. If we wait, they'll take us one by one, and no one will ever know. Rebecca Dalton's hands shook as she clutched her shawl. So what do we do? Run, in the snow, with no supplies. We don't have a choice, Catherine said. It's run, or vanish forever. The silence that followed was heavier than any sermon, any interrogation. Each woman understood the truth. Escape meant braving frozen mountains, hunger, and the possibility of capture. But staying meant certain death. The whispering oath. Before they left that night, the women made a vow. Not a prayer, not a blessing, an oath whispered in the dark. We survive together, or not at all. It wasn't courage that bound them, but desperation. They were no longer just plural wives. They were hunted women, bound by the knowledge that the very people who claimed to protect them had written their death warrants. And as the night wind howled through the valley, Sarah realized something chilling. The purification covenant wasn't just a plan. It was already in motion. April 8th was coming, and so was the reckoning. Right finger if this story gave you chills, share it with someone who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe, because in the next part, we'll follow Sarah and the other women as they risk everything to escape the death sentence hanging over Cedar Valley. Would you like me to continue part 5 as the beginning of their escape attempt through the mountains, turning the story into a survival horror? Part 5 The Escape Through the Frozen Pass. Imagine being told you had 3 days to live. Not by a doctor, not by illness, but by the very people you once trusted, your husband, your neighbors, even your church. That was the grim reality for Sarah Pemberton and the other wives marked for relocation in Cedar Valley, April 1859. They weren't waiting around to be marched into the mountains and buried in unmarked graves. No, they made a choice that few dared in those times: escape. But leaving Cedar Valley wasn't as simple as walking away. The settlement was surrounded by watchful eyes, guarded paths, and freezing mountain ranges that swallowed travelers whole. What followed was a journey so terrifying, it blurred the line between history and nightmare. The night of decision. On April 7th, just hours before they were to be relocated, the 7 women slipped out of their homes one by one. Each left under a different excuse: fetching water, visiting a sick child, tending to livestock. None of them returned. They gathered in Catherine Fletcher's barn, cloaked in the blackness of night. No lanterns were lit, even a flicker of light could give them away. They carried little. A few loaves of bread, strips of salted meat, flasks of water, and blankets torn into strips for binding their feet against the snow. Once we step outside this valley, Sarah whispered, we don't look back. Her words weren't dramatic. They were survival. Because looking back meant hesitation. And hesitation, in Cedar Valley, meant death. Into the mountains. By midnight, the women had slipped into the foothills beyond the settlement, following a path Catherine remembered from childhood. The moonlight turned the snow into a silver sheet, making every movement feel exposed. The silence was crushing, broken only by the crunch of their footsteps and the occasional cry of a night bird. Behind them, the valley slept. Or so they thought, because what they didn't know was that the men of the Purification Covenant had already noticed their absence. The pursuit begins. At dawn, Elder Carrington and 3 chosen men found the barn door ajar. Inside, the ground was scuffed, hay scattered. The tracks in the dirt told the story clearly enough: the women had fled. Carrington didn't rage. He didn't shout. He simply tightened his coat and ordered the men to saddle the horses. They'll think the mountains will protect them, he said coldly. But the mountains are ours. The hunters set out before the sun fully rose, carrying rifles, provisions, and shovels. Shovels not for snow, but for the graves they expected to dig. The horror of the pass. By the second day of their escape, the wives had reached a narrow pass known locally as Widow's Gorge. The name itself was enough to send shivers, an area where avalanches were common, and travelers vanished into icy ravines. The air was sharp enough to slice lungs. Their shoes, not built for mountain snow, soaked through quickly. Anna Sullivan stumbled often, her lips blue from the cold. Miriam Wallace coughed blood into the snow, but pressed on, clutching Sarah's arm for balance. And then the whispers began. Not from the women, but from the mountains themselves. Wind funneled through the gorge in strange ways, carrying what sounded like voices. Low, urgent, almost human. At first, they dismissed it as imagination born of exhaustion. But when the whispers began shaping into words, fragments of prayers, pieces of hymns they'd heard in Cedar Valley, the women froze in terror. "Do you hear it?" Rebecca Dalton whispered. They all nodded. The mountains weren't empty. The first death. That night, they camped under a ridge, huddled together for warmth. Their fire was no more than a handful of sparks, they couldn't risk being seen. In the dead of night, Catherine Fletcher went to gather snow for water. She never came back. At dawn, they found her body at the edge of the ridge, sprawled unnaturally, her face pale as marble. There were no tracks of struggle, no signs of falling. Just her body, frozen stiff, her eyes wide open as if she had seen something unspeakable. Her lips, though blue and cracked, were curled in what looked disturbingly like a scream. The women buried her quickly beneath the snow. No prayers were said, only silence. And from that moment, every shadow in the mountains felt alive. The hunters close in. By April 9th, the men of the Covenant were no more than a few hours behind. They found Catherine's shallow grave easily, her scarf poking out from the snow. Carrington knelt beside it, brushing the snow away with his gloved hand. "They've chosen death in the cold over obedience," he murmured. "So be it." The hunters pressed forward, following the trail of desperate footprints, dragging one of their shovels behind them. The scrape of metal against ice echoed through the mountains like a warning bell. Visions in the snow. Exhaustion twisted the women's minds. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs. Sleep deprivation clawed at their sanity. And then the visions began. Anna claimed she saw children playing ahead of them in the snow, laughing, skipping, their faces blurred by mist. But when she chased forward, the children dissolved into icy wind. Miriam swore she heard her husband calling her name from behind a boulder. She ran toward the voice, only to find nothing but rock and shadow. The whispers were growing louder now, almost constant, as if the mountains themselves were mocking their suffering. Sarah alone fought to keep her grip on reality. But even she admitted later in her journal that she saw something impossible that night. A procession of women walking silently along the ridgeline, their dresses torn, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. Ghosts of others who had been relocated. The trap ahead. By April 10th, the women reached the edge of the pass. Beyond it lay a steep descent into another valley, a possible escape route if they survived the climb. But as they approached, Sarah spotted something that froze her blood. Boot prints. Fresh ones. The hunters weren't behind them anymore. They were ahead, waiting. Panic rippled through the group. Some wanted to turn back, others wanted to scatter. But Sarah knew scattering meant death. "They want us to break," she whispered fiercely. "That's their trap. We stay together." The decision was made. They would not go down quietly. The blood moon. That night, the sky turned crimson. A rare lunar eclipse bathed the mountains in red light, making the snow glow like spilled blood. The women huddled together, their breaths shallow, their eyes fixed on the shadows at the edge of their camp. For they all knew, without a doubt, that the hunters were near. They could hear the scrape of a shovel, the click of a rifle being loaded. And worse, they could hear laughter. Not loud, but soft. Cruel, patient. The Covenant men weren't in a hurry. They knew the mountains would weaken the women faster than bullets ever could. And as the blood moon glared down from the heavens, Sarah realized something horrifying. Escape wasn't just about survival anymore. It had become a battle against the valley itself. Because Cedar Valley wasn't letting go. Not of her. Not of any of them. Right finger, if this part left you breathless, you won't want to miss what comes next. In Part 6, we'll witness the terrifying confrontation in the mountains, where hunters, haunted wives, and the spirits of the valley collide in a night of unspeakable horror. Do you want me to make Part 6 the climactic confrontation, A brutal mix of history and supernatural horror, where some women fight back, and the true darkness of the Covenant is revealed. Part 6: The Confrontation in Widow's Gorge. When the blood moon hung over Widow's Gorge on April 10, 1859, the women of Cedar Valley understood one thing with chilling clarity: they were being hunted, not only by men, but by something older, darker, and far less merciful. The hunters were no longer just behind them. They were all around. The red glow. The crimson light painted the mountains like fresh wounds. Snow glittered red as if soaked in blood. The wives huddled together, their blankets pulled tight, their lips blue from cold. Sarah Pemberton clutched a small wooden cross she'd carved from her son's toy block before she fled. "We have to move," she whispered. "If we stay, they'll find us before dawn." But where could they go? Ahead lay the steep descent into another valley, impossible to navigate in the dark. Behind them were the men with rifles, shovels, and orders. And all around, the whispers, the ghostly hymns that slipped through the canyon walls, singing of death. The women were trapped in a cage carved by nature and haunted by history. The hunters approach. Down the ridge, Carrington and his 3 chosen men crept through the snow. Their boots crunched rhythmically, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. They weren't rushing. They knew desperation always slowed prey. "Leave one alive," Carrington murmured. "We need a message sent. The others, the earth can take them." His voice carried strangely in the gorge, as though the wind itself repeated his words. One of the men flinched and crossed himself. "The mountains echo more than words, Elder," he muttered. But Carrington only smiled thinly. "Then let them echo with judgment." The women's stand. By midnight, the wives realized there was no running. Their bodies were failing, their food nearly gone. "We fight," Rebecca Dalton said, her voice shaking but fierce. She picked up a jagged rock, her fingers trembling around it. "Better the mountain takes me than Carrington." The others nodded, though none of them truly believed rocks and frozen sticks could hold off rifles. Still, Sarah knew something the others didn't. She had been keeping it hidden, pressed against her chest since the night they fled. It was her husband's pistol. She hadn't told them because she feared the noise of a gunshot would give them away. But now, with the hunters so close, she pulled it from beneath her blanket. The women gasped. "There are only 2 bullets," Sarah warned. "We choose carefully." The weight of those words settled over them like another shovelful of snow. Ghosts in the gorge. As the women whispered their plan, the wind rose suddenly, howling through the gorge like a chorus of voices. It wasn't just sound, it was words. Clearer now than ever before. "Come back, come back, come back." The women froze, their breath caught in their throats. From the mist along the ridge, shapes began to form. Pale, tattered figures of women, their dresses torn, their hair matted, their eyes hollow and black. The relocated. Anna Sullivan screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the wind. The apparitions moved in silence, drifting closer, their lips moving in endless hymns. "We are not alone," Miriam whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. The first shot. Then came the sound, boots on ice. The hunters had arrived. One of Carrington's men emerged from the fog, his rifle raised, his eyes scanning. He didn't even notice the ghostly women drifting just behind him. Sarah steadied her shaking hands, the pistol cold as ice. She waited until he took one more step, until his boot cracked loudly against a frozen branch. Then she fired. The shot thundered through the gorge, echoing like cannon fire. The man dropped instantly, his blood seeping into the snow. The women screamed, not from triumph, but from terror. Because the gunshot hadn't just killed a hunter. It had awakened the gorge itself. Avalanche of the dead. The mountain groaned. A deep, rumbling growl rolled through the canyon. Snow cracked above them, sliding, shifting. And then it came, an avalanche, roaring down the slope, carrying ice, stone, and something else. Something impossible. The pale figures of the dead were swept into the wave of snow, their faces twisted, their mouths open in soundless screams. The avalanche wasn't just snow, it was a flood of the forgotten, a tide of every woman who had been buried in Cedar Valley's relocations. The hunters scattered, shouting, their rifles useless against a wall of death. One was swallowed instantly, vanishing beneath the torrent. Another clung to a rock, screaming as ghostly hands pulled at him, dragging him into the snow. Carrington stood his ground, his arms raised as if commanding the storm. His voice rang out, "These are the chosen, these are the purified, take them back." But the dead did not obey. They surged toward him with hungry silence. Dash dash dash. The women flee. Sarah grabbed Miriam and Anna by the arms, dragging them away from the oncoming torrent. "Run," she screamed. The wives stumbled down the slope, slipping on ice, clawing at rocks with numb hands. Behind them, the avalanche thundered, swallowing the gorge, burying hunters and ghosts alike. The crimson moon glared down, turning the snow into rivers of blood. Rebecca Dalton fell, her leg twisting beneath her. Sarah tried to pull her up, but Rebecca shook her head, pressing the jagged rock into Sarah's hand. "Go," she rasped. "Tell them, tell everyone." And then the snow hit. Sarah was dragged forward, tumbling, choking on ice and blood. She felt hands pulling at her, not alive, not dead, but something in between. And then, silence. Dash dash dash. After the avalanche, when Sarah awoke, the world was buried. She was half covered in snow, her body numb, her ears ringing. Around her, the gorge was unrecognizable, just a wasteland of broken trees and frozen corpses poking through the ice. The other wives were gone. Whether buried, taken, or escaped, she did not know. But one thing chilled her more than the snow: Carrington was not among the dead. Somehow, the elder had survived. His voice drifted faintly through the storm, carried by the wind. A hymn, calm, patient, promising that the hunt was not over. Sarah staggered to her feet, clutching the pistol, though it now held only a single bullet. The mountain had not saved them. It had only delayed the inevitable. The covenant was still coming. And the dead were coming with them. Dash dash dash. Right finger in part 7, the nightmare deepens as Sarah stumbles into an abandoned mining camp, where she uncovers chilling evidence that Cedar Valley's curse has haunted the land for generations. Dash dash dash. Would you like me to make part 7 more psychological horror, Sarah trapped with echoes of the past in the mining camp, or brutal survival horror, Carrington's men closing in, with supernatural forces tightening? Part 7, The Forgotten Mine. The morning after the avalanche came like a cruel trick. The sun rose pale and thin, shining weakly through the storm clouds. It turned the Valley of Death into something almost beautiful, though Sarah knew better. Beauty in Cedar Valley was always a disguise for horror. She staggered through the snow, her legs raw and bleeding, her breath shallow. She had survived, though she could not say why. Most of the other wives had vanished into the gorge. Buried, swallowed, or worse. And Carrington, he was still alive. The thought was enough to keep her moving. But she didn't know where to go. Every trail led back into danger. Until, after hours of stumbling, she saw it. A cluster of old shacks and a yawning black entrance cut into the mountain. A mine. Dash dash dash. The abandoned camp. The camp was silent, though not deserted. Snow had buried half the cabins, their roofs caved in, their chimneys broken. Tools were scattered as if dropped mid-stroke, rusted shovels, broken picks, splintered wheelbarrows. But it was the mine entrance that pulled Sarah closer. The wooden beams that framed it were carved with symbols, crude crosses, circles, and names scratched by desperate hands. Some were half erased, as though the mountain itself had tried to wipe them away. She touched the nearest carving and read aloud the words. "Lord forgive me, 1824. This place was older than Cedar Valley's covenant. Older than Carrington. And yet, she felt the same sickness here. Dash dash dash. Inside the mine, the darkness swallowed her as she stepped inside. Her boots crunched over gravel and bone-dry wood. The smell was overwhelming. Iron, mold, and something fouler, like blood that had seeped too deep to wash away. She lit a splinter of wood from the campfire remains, holding it like a torch. The flame quivered, revealing the walls. They weren't just stone. They were painted. Crude shapes scrawled in black pitch, stretching across. The tunnels. Stick figures of women with hollow eyes, men kneeling before them, children with their mouths stitched shut. Between them, words written in Latin, in English, in something she couldn't read. Her skin prickled as she realized the figures weren't painted on the stone, they were painted in blood. The ledger of the dead. Deeper inside, she found a wooden crate. The lid was half rotten, but inside lay scraps of parchment and a thick leather-bound book. Its pages were brittle, yellowed, covered in cramped handwriting. She opened it carefully. It was a ledger. August 9, 1824. 6 more women sent below. Elder says the mountain will not rest until the debt is paid. October 2, 1825. They sing even after the dirt covers them. My ears bleed from their hymns. God help us. March 18, 1827. The children refuse to speak. Their eyes are black. The mountain has taken root inside them. Each page was worse than the last. Names filled the margins, dozens, then hundreds. Almost all were women, and the last entry made Sarah's blood run colder than the snow outside. April 3, 1859. The debt continues. The covenant demands its sacrifice. Elder Carrington has seen the path forward. It was only a week old. Whispers in the dark. As Sarah closed the book, the mind shifted. A faint wind moved through the tunnels, though there was no way for air to flow this deep underground. The flame of her torch wavered. Then came the whispers. Sarah. She froze. The voice was her husband's. Sarah, come home. Bring the boy. We forgive you. Her grip tightened on the pistol. She knew it was a trick, but her heart ached at the sound. She had buried her son before the covenant came for her. No voice should have been able to speak his name. And yet, from deeper in the mine, she heard it, soft, broken, and small. Mama. The dead miner. She stumbled back, her torchlight falling on a figure slumped against the wall. A miner, or what was left of one. His body was mummified, his skin stretched tight over bone, his mouth frozen wide in a scream. His eyes were black pits, not from rot, but from something worse. Pinned to his chest was a note, written in a frantic scrawl. Do not dig deeper. The wives do not rest. They are not ours to bury. The words were smeared with dried blood. And then the corpse twitched. Its jaw creaked open wider, wider, until bone cracked. From its throat came not one voice but many, women singing in perfect, dreadful unison. A hymn of mourning, a hymn of rage. The sound rose until the beams of the mine shook. Pebbles rained from the ceiling. Sarah ran. The collapse. The tunnels seemed endless, twisting back on themselves. Her torch sputtered, threatening to die. Behind her, the hymn grew louder, echoing through the stone like water through a well. She turned a corner and slammed into a wall. No, into wood. A door. Carvings covered it. Rows of women, their hands outstretched, their eyes painted black. And nailed across the planks were dozens of small bones, finger bones, teeth, a child's skull. The hymn grew deafening. The mine groaned like a living thing. With a scream, Sarah raised the pistol and fired her last bullet into the lock. The door burst open. She fell through as the tunnel collapsed behind her, burying the hymn in choking silence. The chamber below. When she opened her eyes, she was lying in a vast chamber, lit by a faint red glow that seemed to come from the stone itself. She wasn't alone. Bodies lined the cavern walls, hundreds of women, perfectly preserved, their eyes open, their faces serene. They were not rotting. They looked as though they had only just laid down to rest. And every single one of them was watching her. Sarah staggered to her feet, her scream caught in her throat. Above her, carved into the stone in letters 10 feet high, were the words. The wives belong to the mountain. The return of Carrington. Footsteps echoed down the tunnel behind her. Slow, measured. Then came the voice she dreaded most. Sarah, Carrington said, his tone almost gentle. You've come to the heart. You've seen the covenant for what it truly is. His shadow stretched into the chamber before he did. When he appeared, his eyes glowed faintly red in the dim light. He carried no rifle, no tools. Only a book of scripture bound in black leather. The wives never die, he said. They only wait. And now you will join them. Behind him, the hymn rose again, not from the mine, but from the preserved mouths of the wives themselves. Sarah's pistol was empty. Her strength was gone. But she knew one thing. She would never kneel. Right finger in Part 8. Sarah faces the unthinkable as the preserved wives awaken, and the truth of Cedar Valley's covenant is revealed, rooted in blood, betrayal, and something older than man. Do you want Part 8 to focus more on the supernatural awakening of the wives, full horror, or on Carrington's twisted theology, historical horror with cult dread? Part 8: The Awakening of the Wives. The cavern pulsed with a red glow, as if the mountain itself had veins filled with molten blood. Sarah stood frozen, surrounded by hundreds of women, wives, mothers, daughters, lying in deathless repose against the walls. Their eyes were open, glassy yet aware, their chests unmoving but not lifeless. And Carrington's voice carried through it all, deep and steady, the tone of a man who thought himself chosen. "The covenant was never mine to create," he said, stepping closer. His boots crunched against the gravel floor. "I only carried it forward. These wives, they were the offering. The mountain is the altar. And you, Sarah, are to be its next bride." The wives' lips began to move. First a murmur, then a rising chorus. Their voices layered upon each other until the chamber itself seemed to breathe with their hymn. Sarah clutched the empty pistol, though she knew it was useless now. "You're a murderer," she spat. Her throat burned with rage and fear. "You tricked them all." Carrington shook his head slowly. "No, I freed them from the lie of earthly life. They were chosen for eternity. Look at them. Did they look dead to you?" Sarah turned, and wished she hadn't. The wives were stirring. The first movement. It was subtle at first. A twitch of a hand, the faintest tilt of a head. Then, like ripples spreading across a pond, the preserved women began to rise. Their bones cracked softly, but their flesh did not wither. Their hair flowed as though stirred by a wind only they could feel. One by one, they lifted their eyes to Sarah. Not to Carrington, their so-called prophet, but to her. And in that moment, Sarah knew the truth. The wives weren't loyal to him. They never had been. They were waiting. The voice of the dead. The hymn stopped suddenly. Then came a single voice, clear as glass, carrying through the chamber. Sarah. Her knees nearly buckled. She recognized it instantly. It was Margaret, her neighbor, the woman she had buried beneath the snow, the one who had smiled at her across the prayer hall just days before. Margaret's body leaned forward from the cavern wall. Her lips moved slowly, every word deliberate. "We are not dead. We are bound. The covenant holds us. Break it, and we will be free." Carrington's eyes narrowed, his voice rising like thunder. "Silence. You belong to me, to the mountain. I speak for God himself." But the wives ignored him. More voices rose, whispering Sarah's name, calling her toward them. "Free us. Break the seal. You are the last." Carrington's wrath. Carrington's mask of calm shattered. His face twisted with fury, veins bulging in his neck. He raised the black book high above his head. "This woman is the serpent in our garden. She seeks to undo the covenant. She will not succeed." As he spoke, the chamber trembled. The walls seemed to close in, the red glow intensifying until it burned Sarah's eyes. The wives' chorus grew louder, their whispers now a roar that drowned even Carrington's bellow. Sarah stumbled backward, her boot striking something hard. She looked down. It was another ledger, older than the one she'd found in the mine. Its cover was cracked, its pages brittle. Across the front, scrawled in jagged letters, were the words. "The First Covenant. The truth revealed." She dropped to her knees, flipping the book open. The script was uneven, as though written by trembling hands. She read aloud. "In the year of our Lord 1789, we struck the earth and found not silver, but hunger. The mountain demanded payment. The first wives were given. The mountain's voice said, 'Bind them, and you will prosper. Refuse, and you will starve.' The pages told the story of the first settlers, their crops failing, their children dying, until they turned to the unthinkable. The covenant was no holy pact. It was a bargain with something older, something deep within the stone. And Carrington had been feeding it ever since. The unholy priest. Carrington lunged forward, ripping the book from her hands. His eyes glowed red, brighter than before. His voice thundered in a language Sarah did not understand, syllables that seemed to claw at her mind. The wives shuddered at the sound, their hymn faltering. Then, before her eyes, Carrington began to change. His skin cracked like dry earth, splitting to reveal black stone beneath. His hands elongated, his fingers curling into claws. His voice deepened, echoing like the rumble of the earth itself. He was no longer a man. He was the covenant made flesh. The rising of the wives. The wives screamed as one, their voices shaking the chamber. Their eyes blazed with white fire, and their bodies tore free from the stone. They swarmed toward Carrington, their fingers outstretched, their mouths open in defiance. Their hymn rose again, no longer mournful but vengeful, a song of revolt against centuries of silence. The ground split, red light pouring from the cracks. The cavern filled with dust and smoke. Sarah fell to the floor, shielding her face. She had wanted freedom, but what she had unleashed might be worse than bondage. The judgment. When the smoke cleared, Carrington stood in the center of the chamber, his form twisted beyond recognition. His body was a grotesque fusion of man and stone, his veins glowing like molten rock. The black book burned in his clawed hand, its pages turning to ash. The wives circled him, their hymn now a weapon. Every note struck him like a blow, cracking his stone flesh, forcing him to his knees. And Sarah realized, they weren't singing to him. They were singing through him. The covenant's power wasn't his to command. It had always belonged to them. Carrington roared, lashing out with claws of obsidian. Several wives fell, their bodies shattering like glass, but more rose to replace them. Their voices grew louder, pressing him down, drowning him in their fury. The choice. Sarah's hand brushed against the cracked ledger again, half buried in the gravel. She lifted it, her mind racing. If the covenant began with a bargain written in words, perhaps it could end with words. Her voice shook as she shouted over the hymn, I break this covenant. I return the wives to the earth, not as offerings, but as women. The wives chorus, stilled for a heartbeat, their blazing eyes fixed on her. Then, as one, they echoed her words, we return as women. The chamber exploded with light. The fall of Carrington. Carrington shrieked, his body fracturing like a shattered mountain peak. The black stone of his skin split apart, chunks falling to the ground, glowing with heat before turning to dust. His scream was swallowed by the hymn of the wives, now triumphant, unrelenting. With a final crack, his body collapsed into rubble. The black book crumbled in his hand, its ashes scattering into the red glow. The mountain roared one last time, then fell silent. The silence after. Sarah collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. The wives stood around her, their faces calm once more. The fire in their eyes dimmed, replaced by peace she had never seen before. One by one, they lay back against the cavern walls. Their bodies dissolved into dust, carried away by a wind that had no source. In minutes, the chamber was empty. Except for Sarah, and the weight of what she had witnessed. Right finger in part 9, Sarah must find her way out of the ruined mine, but the Covenant's destruction has awakened something far worse, older than Carrington, buried deeper in the mountain. Do you want part 9 to lean more into the cosmic horror of what lies beneath the mountain, or the personal horror of Sarah's isolation and survival? Part 9 The Thing Beneath the Mountain. The cavern was silent now. Too silent. Sarah's heartbeat was the only sound, echoing in the emptiness where once 100 wives had sung. The air was thick with dust, glowing faintly in the dim red light that lingered on the walls. Carrington's remains were nothing but black rubble, still warm, scattered like broken idols at her feet. For a moment, she let herself believe it was over. The wives had returned to the earth. The covenant had been broken. But then the mountain exhaled. It was not wind, not air, but a low vibration, like the deep breath of something vast and sleeping. The ground trembled beneath her palms. Stones tumbled from the ceiling. The red glow pulsed brighter, spreading veins of light deeper into the rock. The wives had been offerings. Carrington had been a priest. But the mountain itself had always been the god. The descent. Sarah staggered to her feet. The cracked ledger lay in the dust, its pages curling from the heat. She stuffed it into her coat, clutching it like a lifeline. Her lamp had shattered in the chaos, but the red glow gave enough light to guide her steps. The passage back to the mine entrance had caved in. The only way forward was deeper, toward the source of the glow. Her throat ached from the dust, and each breath tasted of iron. She pressed onward, her boots crunching on shards of obsidian that bled faint warmth into her soles. And beneath it all, she could hear something. Not voices, not hymns, a heartbeat, slow, colossal. It shook the walls like the drums of war. The chamber of roots. The passage opened into a vast hollow beneath the mountain. Stalactites hung like teeth. The floor was a maze of black stone veins glowing with molten light. At the center rose a massive column of rock, throbbing in rhythm with the heartbeat. Sarah's eyes widened. The wives had not been bound to the walls of the cavern. They had been feeding this thing. Their lives, no, their souls, drawn down into the roots of the mountain, woven into its stone. Carrington had not been the Covenant's master. He had been its servant. And now, with his death, the true master was waking. The whisper beneath. A sound slithered into Sarah's ears, low, intimate, almost tender. It was not speech, not words, but the meaning sank directly into her mind. You broke the seal. You freed what was bound. They sang for release, and you gave it. Now their song is mine. Sarah clutched her head, shaking violently. No, she whispered. I didn't free you. I freed them. The voice laughed without sound, a vibration that rattled her teeth. The wives were roots. Their voices were threads. In cutting them loose, you awakened the trunk. I rise because you willed it. Her knees buckled. She pressed her forehead against the cold stone floor, fighting the dizziness that swam through her skull. The mountain's heartbeat grew faster. Louder. A history in blood. Sarah dragged the cracked ledger from her coat with trembling fingers. She flipped through the brittle pages, desperate for something, anything, that might explain what she was facing. One passage caught her eye. The voice in the stone promised bounty. We gave the first wives, and the ore flowed like rivers. We gave more, and our children grew fat. When we faltered, it punished us with famine and fever. We obeyed, for to resist was death. Her stomach turned. The wives had not been sacrifices to God. They had been food for something buried beneath the mountain since time beyond memory. The settlers had dressed it in scripture to make their horror bearable. Carrington had turned it into religion. And Sarah, God help her, had fed it freedom. The thing emerges. The column of rock at the chamber's center began to split. Cracks zigzagged up its surface, spilling red light so bright it seared Sarah's eyes. A sound like grinding stone filled the hollow, deafening in its force. Chunks of rock fell away, revealing something inside. A shape. It was vast, far larger than any human form. Its flesh was not flesh but molten stone, threaded with glowing veins. Its head brushed the cavern ceiling. Its arms were jagged limbs of obsidian, its fingers dripping sparks like burning pitch. And yet, its face bore a terrible familiarity. It was Carrington's face. Twisted, elongated, but undeniably his. The Covenant had not ended with his death. It had become him. The chase. The creature roared, and the chamber shook. Stalactites snapped loose, crashing to the floor in explosions of dust and fire. Sarah ran. She darted through the maze of glowing veins, the ground shuddering with each step of the giant behind her. Its molten breath scorched her back, its claws tearing through stone as though it were paper. She ducked beneath a falling boulder, her coat catching on a jagged edge and tearing free. She left it behind, clutching only the ledger as she sprinted toward a narrow fissure at the edge of the chamber. Behind her, the creature's roar echoed like an avalanche. The ascent. The fissure led upward, a rough, jagged climb. Sarah scrambled, her hands bleeding as she pulled herself higher. The rock burned against her palms, but she refused to let go. Below, the thing clawed at the fissure's mouth, its glowing eyes fixed on her. Its arms stretched upward, claws raking the stone just inches from her feet. Sarah screamed and hauled herself onto a narrow ledge. She pressed her back against the wall, gasping, her chest heaving. The creature bellowed, its molten face snarling. But its bulk could not follow her through the narrow fissure. For now. The revelation. Sarah slumped against the rock, the ledger open on her lap. Her eyes blurred with exhaustion, but one final passage caught her attention. The wives were never enough. It will rise when the covenant is broken, seeking a greater harvest. The land, the town, the valley, it will claim all. Unless one remains bound willingly, to hold it beneath the stone. Her stomach turned to ice. The wives had been chains, not offerings. Their bondage had held the mountain's hunger in place. Now that she had freed them, the thing was loose. Unless she became the new chain. The choice. The creature's heartbeat thundered through the stone, shaking the ledge beneath her. Its eyes glowed from the fissure below, fixed on her with hunger that was not human. The ledger trembled in her hands. One must bind willingly. Sarah closed her eyes. She saw Margaret's face. The faces of the other wives. Women who had never chosen, who had been stolen, bound, and buried. But she was different. She could choose. The final step. Sarah pressed her hand against the stone, feeling its warmth pulse beneath her skin. She whispered, not to Carrington, not to the wives, but to the mountain itself. I bind you, not as a wife, not as an offering, but as myself. The fissure shook violently. The creature roared, its claws raking the rock, but it could not pass. The red glow flared blindingly bright. Sarah screamed as the heat surged into her body, searing her flesh, filling her veins with fire. Her vision blurred. Her voice rose, mingling with the mountain's heartbeat until the two became one. The last thing she felt was silence. Right finger in Part 10 Final. We witness the aftermath. What becomes of Sarah, the town, and the curse of the covenant. The horror reaches its conclusion as history and myth collide. Would you like Part 10 to end in tragic sacrifice, Sarah consumed forever, or a dark triumph, she survives, but changed by the mountain's power? Part 10 The last wife of Carrington's covenant. The mountain was silent again. No heartbeat, no hymns, no screams, just silence. The townsfolk of Carrington's Hollow woke to a dawn unlike any they had ever seen. The air was sharp and still, the sky washed in pale gray. The mines no longer glowed. The earth no longer trembled. But something was missing. The women who had vanished for generations, those whose names were whispered with grief, remained absent. Their houses stood empty, their beds cold, only their memory lingered, heavy and spectral, like smoke after fire. And Sarah was nowhere to be found. The legend begins. The miners who dared approach the cavern claimed it was sealed. The fissures had collapsed, the glowing veins buried deep. No sound came from the stone except, some swore, a faint echo, like a voice humming far beneath the rock. The elders told themselves it was imagination. But others knew better. They whispered that Sarah had become the final wife of Carrington's covenant, not taken, but chosen. Where the others had been bound in chains of iron and cruelty, she had bound herself with will alone. And because of that choice, the mountain slept. The ledger. Weeks later, a group of miners clearing rubble found a half-burned book near the cavern mouth. Its leather cover was scorched, its pages blackened at the edges. But some passages remained legible. The last entry read, "The mountain feeds. It always has. But it may be stilled by a willing heart. I go now where the others were driven, but I go by my own hand." If you read this, know the truth. The covenant was never with Carrington. It was with the stone itself. I will hold it, so long as I can. Pray there is never another to take my place. The miners passed the ledger from hand to hand, trembling. None dared keep it. None dared burn it. It was placed in the church, though the preacher never read from it aloud. It was not scripture. It was warning. A town haunted. Carrington's Hollow changed after Sarah's disappearance. The mines, once the source of the town's wealth, became a place of dread. Men went in only when hunger drove them. Some claimed to hear a woman's voice singing deep within the stone, soft, steady, sorrowful. Crops withered more often, cattle died without cause, children were born sickly, their mothers haunted by dreams of fire and chains. And always, the people asked themselves, had Sarah's sacrifice ended the curse, or only delayed it? The mountain stirs. 50 years later, long after the last of Carrington's bloodline had turned to dust, travelers came through the valley. They saw the mountain and felt its weight, though they did not know its story. A storm struck one summer night. The earth quaked, lightning split the sky, and for a single heartbeat, the mountain glowed red again. The elders fell to their knees, whispering the old names, the old fears. But the glow faded, and silence returned. Some believed Sarah had faltered, her hold loosening after decades of torment. Others believed she had grown into something else entirely, a spirit fused with stone, neither wife nor woman, but guardian. The final sight. An old hunter swore, on his deathbed, that he had seen her. He had climbed the slopes during a bitter winter, searching for game. The snow was deep, the wind howled, and yet, he found himself near the old mine entrance, half buried in drifts. There, standing in the glow of the storm, was a figure. A woman. Her skin glimmered like obsidian, cracked with glowing veins of red. Her eyes burned like embers. Chains of light wrapped her wrists, yet she did not strain against them. She stood tall, unbroken. And when she turned her head, the hunter said, her face was both her own and not her own. Sarah, and something more. She looked at him once, her lips parting as though to speak. But all he heard was the mountain's heartbeat. Then she vanished into the stone. The Last Covenant. No one knows what truly became of Sarah. Some say she became the bride of the mountain, her soul forever chained to hold back its hunger. Others believe she conquered it, that she tamed the beast where Carrington had only served it, turning herself into a guardian rather than a prisoner. But the truth is this, the covenant was not broken. It was rewritten. By blood, by fire, by sacrifice, it was bound anew, not in Carrington's name, but in Sarah's. And so the mountain sleeps. For now. A warning to us. History buries its horrors, but they do not die. Carrington's hollow faded from maps. Families left. The mines collapsed. The church rotted where it stood. But the mountain remains, eternal and silent. Travelers who wander too close sometimes vanish. Hikers whisper of voices calling from the stone. Some say the air itself grows warmer the deeper you climb, as though a fire smolders just beneath the earth. And in the night, if you press your ear to the ground, you may still hear it. A heartbeat. Slow, steady, patient, waiting for the day the last covenant breaks. Epilogue. Sarah's story is not just about horror, it is about history repeating when silence is mistaken for safety. Carrington's Hollow teaches us that the past never truly sleeps. Because sometimes, the mountain is still hungry. Call to action. If this story gripped you, if it sent chills down your spine or made you glance twice at the shadows, don't let it vanish like the wives of Carrington's Covenant. Right finger subscribe for more historic horror tales. Right finger share this with friends who dare to read it in the dark. Right finger comment below. What do you think truly happened to Sarah? Did she conquer the mountain, or did she become its prisoner? The story may be finished, but the legend lives on.